The black Mercedes rolled slowly down the overgrown dirt road, its polished exterior looking completely out of place among the wild grass and forgotten farmland. Behind the wheel sat Park Tae-kong, a man in his early 70s with neatly combed hair and a dark tailored suit that spoke of immense wealth and success. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as the silence of the countryside pressed against the glass. It had been 47 years. 47 years since he had last driven down this road, fleeing the dust of the farm for the neon-lit power of the city. As the old house finally came into view, Tae-kong felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. The structure was a ghost of its former self. The white paint was peeling in long, ugly strips, and the windows were either cracked or missing entirely. The front porch where his father, Kim Jae-kong, used to sit, was sagging under the weight of decades of neglect. He pulled the car to a stop and simply sat there, staring. On the passenger seat lay a manila folder containing the legal paperwork that would end this history once and for all. The demolition company was scheduled to arrive next week to clear the land and subdivide the lot. It was the practical choice, the ruthless choice that had made him a legend in the criminal underworld. He stepped out of the vehicle, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the soft, neglected earth. The air smelled of damp wood and something else, something he hadn't expected. Weeds had claimed most of the yard, yet near the foundation of the rotting house, a splash of color defied the decay. Roses, red, yellow, and pink, bloomed vibrantly against the gray wood. They were his mother Ji-woo's flowers. Tae-kong froze. He had come here to bury his past, yet the very ground seemed to be reaching out to remind him of what he had left behind. As he moved toward the sagging porch, the silence was suddenly broken not by the wind, but by the unmistakable sound of children's voices coming from the back of the property. He reached into his jacket, his hand instinctively hovering near his phone as if to call for reinforcements, but his feet moved forward of their own accord. He was a boss who feared nothing, yet the sound of that innocent laughter in this dead place made his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. Before we go ahead with the rest of the story, remember to hit that like button, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for more beautiful stories. Also share this with someone out there who might need to hear it. Tae-kong leaned against the hood of the Mercedes, the heat from the engine dissipating into the cool country air. He opened the manila folder, the crisp white pages of the demolition contract fluttering in the breeze. His eyes scanned the cold, legal terminology. Authorized site clearance, subdivision approval, full structure removal. To his associates in the city, this was a routine business move, a way to liquidate an unproductive asset. But to Tae-kong, these papers were a death warrant for the only thing left of Kim Jae-kong and Ji-woo. He looked back at the house, seeing it not as a home, but as a monument to his own desertion. For 47 years, he had told himself that leaving was the only way to survive, that the pride of a ruthless boss was worth more than the dirt of a failing farm. He remembered his father's last words, a curse that had chased him into the city. If you leave, don't come back. He had listened. He hadn't returned when his father died 15 years later, nor 5 years after that when his mother passed away. The house had sat in this silence for 27 years, a rotting witness to his silence. The practical plan was simple. The crew would arrive next week, the heavy machinery would tear through the sagging porch, and the land would be subdivided and sold to the highest bidder. It was the logical end for a man who had built an empire on the philosophy that everything has a price and nothing is permanent. He pulled a heavy, gold-plated pen from his breast pocket, his thumb hovering over the clicker. Yet, as he prepared to sign the final authorization, his gaze drifted back to the roses. They shouldn't have been there. Without care, they should have been choked out by the weeds decades ago. The fact that they were blooming, bright, defiant, and healthy meant that the house wasn't as empty as the legal documents claimed. He tucked the pen back into his suit, the practical resolution suddenly feeling like a lead weight in his chest. He needed to see who was trespassing on his ghosts before he leveled the ground they walked on. Tae-kong moved away from the car, his expensive leather shoes crunching softly on the dry, unkempt grass as he rounded the corner of the structure. The house loomed over him, a skeleton of wood and memories, and he stopped when his eyes caught the jagged black letters spray-painted onto the siding. "Stay away!" The warning was a crude reminder that while he had been building an empire in the city, this place had become a sanctuary for things that lived in the shadows. He reached up to adjust his tie, a habitual gesture of control, but his hand froze mid-air as the sound of laughter, light, rhythmic, and undeniably young, carried on the wind. Walking around the side of the house, Taekong stopped dead in his tracks at what he saw. There, in the very plot of land that had once been his mother's vegetable garden, were 3 children. The oldest, a boy named Johnson who looked to be about 13, was leaning forward with dirt on his hands. His face set in a look of protective concentration. Beside him, a younger boy, Jackson, was darting through the rows of flowers with a basket. His energy a sharp contrast to the stillness of the rot around them. On the ground, sitting in the soft earth near a patch of vibrant roses, was the youngest, a little girl named Nia. She was no more than 5 years old, her small hands carefully patting the dirt near a worn teddy bear that sat beside her like a silent guardian. Taekong watched them from the periphery, his silhouette long and imposing against the afternoon sun. He saw the tricycles parked near the sagging porch and the way the children moved with a sense of belonging that he had lost decades ago. "You have to be gentle with the roots," Johnson was saying to the others, his voice carrying the weight of a responsibility far beyond his years. "Mama says if you're rough, they won't grow back." Taekong felt a sudden, sharp pang of recognition. Those were the same words Ji Woo had whispered to him 47 years ago in this very dirt. He was a man who had ordered executions without a second thought, yet as he stood there, a stay-away sign to his left and a garden of his mother's roses to his right, he found himself unable to take another step forward. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen glowing with the contact for the demolition foreman, but he didn't dial. He just watched the children care for the life he had intended to crush. "Excuse me," Taekong said, his voice cutting through the humid air like a blade. The 3 children spun around instantly, their eyes wide with the sudden realization that they were no longer alone. Little Nia scrambled backward, her small hands clutching her teddy bear as she moved closer to her older brothers. Johnson, the oldest, did not run. Instead, he straightened his back, his dirt-stained hands forming fists at his sides as he stepped in front of Jackson and Nia. "Can we help you, sir?" Johnson asked, his voice trembling slightly but held steady by a fierce, protective resolve. He looked up at the man in the expensive suit, recognizing the cold authority that Taekong radiated. "This is private property. What are you doing here?" Taekong took a slow step forward, his shadow falling over the vibrant roses. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, his tone clinical. "I own this land." The younger boy, Jackson, looked down at the basket of flowers he had been arranging, his face pale. But Johnson didn't back down. He lifted his chin, meeting the gaze of the Mafia boss with a defiance that reminded Taekong painfully of his own youth. "We live here," the boy said simply. "Well, not inside. The house isn't safe. But we take care of the garden. We take care of everything." Taekong frowned, his gaze shifting from the boy to the meticulously weeded rows of vegetables and the flourishing rose beds. "You live here. Where are your parents?" The children exchanged a heavy, silent glance. Nia's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she hid her face against Johnson's shoulder. "It's just us," Johnson said quietly, the forced confidence in his voice beginning to crack. "It's been just us for a while now. After Mama died, they were going to split us up, send us to different foster homes. But we're family. We stay together." He gestured to the surrounding decay, then to the life they had coaxed from the soil. "We found this place. It was empty and abandoned. We're not hurting anyone." Taekong looked at the stay-away sign he had noticed earlier and realized it wasn't a warning from a squatter. It was a shield for a family trying to survive. The ruthless boss, who had spent decades tearing things down, stood silent before a 13-year-old boy who was desperately trying to keep one thing standing. Taekong turned his gaze away from the children, ostensibly to look at the house, but really to hide the sudden sharp moisture in his eyes. He looked back at the garden, truly seeing it for the first time. It wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a living map of a life he had tried to forget. He'd grown up here, the only child of Ji Woo and Kim Jae-kong, and while his father had spent his life in the sweat of the factory, his mother had kept the home and this very garden. They'd had so little money back then, but Ji Woo had always found a way to plant flowers. A home should be beautiful, she would say, her hands dark with the same earth that now stained the children's clothes. Tae-kong stood silent, his mind drifting back 47 years to the night of the fight that had severed his roots. His father had found his acceptance letter, a ticket to a world far from the mud and the roses, and the ultimatum had been final. If he left for the city, he could never come back. He had left and stayed away through the deaths of both parents, building Morrison Industries into a fortress of wealth that felt suddenly hollow. He looked at the neat rows of vegetables and the carefully tended beds, realizing these orphans had created the very thing he had abandoned. "The flowers," Tae-kong said, his voice sounding distant even to himself. "Why the flowers?" Little Nia spoke up, her voice small but remarkably clear. "Because homes should have flowers. Mama always said that." She clutched her teddy bear tighter, looking up at him with eyes that held no malice, only a simple, devastating truth. She said flowers make a place feel like people care about it. Tae-kong felt a tremor in his hand. He had reached the pinnacle of power, surrounding himself with steel and glass, yet he had nothing compared to what these 3 children had found in the ruins of his own neglect, a home that someone cared about. He realized then that for 27 years, his mother's roses had waited for someone to tend them, and these children had answered a prayer he had been too proud to hear. Tae-kong stood frozen as the little girl, Nia, stood up from the dirt and brushed her small hands against her light-colored dress. She walked toward him with a slow, cautious grace, her eyes never leaving his stern face. Johnson and Jackson watched with bated breath, their bodies tense to intervene, but the girl seemed to sense something in the old man that they could not, a flicker of the boy who had once loved this very soil. She reached into the patch of vibrant roses, her fingers finding a single, perfectly bloomed pink flower. With a gentle tug, she snapped the stem and held it out toward the towering man in the dark suit. "This one is the prettiest," she whispered, her voice a soft melody against the backdrop of the creaking house. "It looks like it was waiting for you." Tae-kong looked down at the delicate offering. In the world he inhabited, hands usually held weapons, contracts, or glasses of expensive scotch. He hadn't held a flower in decades. His fingers, calloused and steady, trembled slightly as he reached out to take the rose. The petals were velvet soft, a stark contrast to the cold metal of the phone still gripped in his other hand. "Why give this to me?" he asked, his voice cracking for the first time. "I am a stranger who wants to tear this place down." Nia tilted her head, her expression one of simple, devastating innocence. "But you look sad," she said. "And Mama said you can't be sad when you're holding something beautiful." The ruthless armor that Tae-kong had spent 47 years forging began to splinter. He looked at the girl, then at the boys who were ready to sacrifice everything to stay together, and finally at the pink rose in his palm. This was the shocking truth he had found. He had spent his life destroying enemies to gain power, yet these children, with nothing but a teddy bear and a garden, possessed a strength he couldn't buy. The weight of the demolition folder in his car suddenly felt like a mountain of sin. He wasn't just a boss looking at a piece of real estate anymore. He was a son looking at the life his mother had prayed he would find again. Tae-kong stood in the middle of the garden, the pink rose still held delicately in his hand as the afternoon sun cast long, jagged shadows across the "Stay Away" sign. He looked at Nia's hopeful face, then at the protective stance of her brothers, and finally at the sagging porch that had once been the threshold of his entire world. The cold, mechanical certainty that had brought him here, the ruthless efficiency of a mafia boss, was gone, replaced by a weight in his chest that felt like a long overdue debt. Slowly, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. Johnson tensed, his eyes darting toward the black Mercedes as if expecting a crew of men to emerge and carry out the boss's original orders. Taekong did not look at the boy. His gaze was fixed on the peeling white paint of the house. He scrolled past the contact for the demolition foreman and tapped a name that carried a different kind of power. "Levin," Taekong said when the call connected, his voice regaining its gravelly authority but lacking its usual bite. "Sir, I was expecting your confirmation on the site clearance," the lawyer's voice crackled through the speaker. "The crew is on standby for Monday morning." Taekong watched Nia adjust her teddy bear on the grass. "Cancel the crew," he said firmly. "I want the demolition contract voided immediately. Pay whatever penalties are necessary." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Sir, that land is worth millions once subdivided." "Are you sure?" "I've never been surer of anything in 47 years, Taekong replied, his eyes softening as they landed on the vibrant roses. "And Levin, I need you to do something else. Research the title of the property. I want it placed into a permanent trust. Then, I need you to look into the legal status of 3 minors currently residing at that address: Johnson, Jackson, and Nia." He hung up before the lawyer could ask more questions. The final call had been made, but it wasn't the end he had planned. He looked at the children, who were staring at him with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning hope. "The house is staying," Taekong said quietly, tucking the phone away. "But it needs work. It needs to be a real home again." As he spoke the words, the ruthless boss felt something he hadn't felt since he was a boy standing in this very dirt. He felt like he had finally found his way back. Taekong followed the 3 children onto the sagging porch, his heavy footsteps echoing against the hollow wood. The "stay away" warning seemed to mock him as he crossed the threshold of a place he had vowed never to enter again. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedar and decades of stillness, the light filtering through the cracked windows in dusty golden beams. Jackson, the younger boy, scurried toward a corner of the main room where a small pile of blankets served as a makeshift bed. From beneath a loose floorboard, he pulled out a weathered wooden box. It was a humble thing, its edges rounded by time and the constant touch of small hands. He brought it over to Taekong, holding it with a reverence that most men reserved for gold or ancient artifacts. "We found this in the attic," Jackson whispered, his eyes bright with excitement. It was buried under a pile of old clothes, like someone wanted it to stay safe. With a trembling hand, Taekong lifted the lid. He expected to find legal deeds or perhaps the jewelry he had never bothered to claim. Instead, he found the debris of a childhood he had tried to erase. There was a rusted metal toy car, the one his father, Kim Jae-kong, had brought home after a double shift at the factory. Beside it lay a collection of smooth river stones, each one painstakingly chosen from the creek behind the farm. "And these," Nia said, pointing her small finger at a stack of yellowed papers at the bottom. "They have your name on them." Taekong reached for the papers, his breath hitching. They weren't bills or debts. They were his old school reports and a handful of drawings he had made when he was no older than Nia. His mother, Ji-woo, had kept every single one. Even more shocking was a collection of newspaper clippings from the city, detailing his early business successes. She had followed his life from afar, clipping out his name even after he had stopped calling. "We thought they were important because they were hidden so well," Johnson added quietly. "Like a treasure map of someone's life." Taekong looked at the rusted toy and the clippings of his own ruthless ascent. To his associates, he was a man of steel and shadow, but to the woman who had lived in this house, he had always been the boy who played in the dirt. He realized then that while he had been trying to pull the house down, these children had been busy preserving the soul of it. They hadn't just found a box of old things, they had found the evidence that he was once loved, a truth more valuable than any asset he owned. Taekong reached back into the wooden box, his fingers brushing against a small, cream-colored envelope tucked beneath the old school reports. It was remarkably clean, as if the children had treated it with a special kind of reverence. On the front, in the elegant sweeping Hanja script his mother had been so proud of, was written his name, Park Tae-kong. He opened the letter with the same care he would use to handle a fragile peace treaty. As he began to read, the sounds of the children playing softly in the background faded into a distant hum. The ink was slightly faded, but the voice behind the words was as clear as the day he had walked away. My dearest Tae-kong, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have finally come home. I knew you would. I never listened to the neighbors who said you had forgotten us. A mother knows the heart of her son, even when that son is trying very hard to hide it from himself. Tae-kong felt a hot tear track down his weathered cheek, disappearing into his gray beard. He remembered the cold fury of his father, Kim Jae-kong, and the silence he had maintained for 27 years, convinced that he was a disappointment to be erased. But Ji-woo's words told a different story. She spoke of the pride she felt seeing his name in the papers, not because of the power he had amassed, but because she saw the same drive he'd had as a boy helping her in the garden. I forgive you for the years of silence, she wrote. I forgave you the moment you left, because I knew the farm was too small for the fire in your spirit. My only prayer was that you would one day return to these roses and realize that you never had to be ruthless to be worthy of this home. You were always enough. He folded the paper, his chest heaving with a sob he had suppressed for nearly half a century. The shocking truth wasn't in the decay of the house or the presence of the orphans. It was the realization that the ghost he had come to destroy had actually been waiting to welcome him back with open arms. He looked at Nia, who was watching him with a quiet, knowing smile, and he finally understood. He hadn't come here to pull down a house. He had come here because, for the first time in his life, he was ready to be forgiven. The restoration began the following week, but it was nothing like the clinical demolition Tae-kong had originally planned. Instead of heavy machinery tearing through the past, a team of elite contractors arrived under the boss's strict instruction to preserve the soul of the structure. Tae-kong insisted that Johnson, Jackson, and Nia consult on every decision, ensuring the original wide plank floors and the stone fireplace where Ji-woo once cooked were salvaged and restored. While the exterior retained its historic charm, the interior was transformed with modern necessities, plumbing, electricity, and a proper kitchen that smelled of fresh cedar instead of dust. 6 months after Tae-kong first stepped out of his Mercedes to destroy his history, he stood in a wood-paneled courtroom, no longer as a man of violence, but as a man seeking the title of guardian. The judge granted him legal guardianship of the 3 siblings, formalizing the bond that had been forged in the rose garden. That evening, they gathered for dinner in the newly restored kitchen. The atmosphere was light, filled with the laughter of children who no longer had to hide in the shadows. Tae-kong looked at the 3 faces around the table and pulled out 3 thick envelopes. Inside each was a trust fund, fully funded by the family business he had spent his life building, now repurposed for a different kind of legacy. This is for your futures, Tae-kong said, his voice steady and warm. Johnson, you'll study engineering. Jackson, perhaps you'll be a writer. And Nia, you can be whoever you choose to be. Johnson looked at the amount in the account and whispered, but this is so much money. Tae-kong reached out, placing his hand over the boys. It's an investment in the 3 people who taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. Nia climbed into his lap, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, and looked up at the man who had once been a ruthless stranger. Are you our grandpa now? She asked. Tae-kong felt a rare, genuine tear prick his eye as he pulled them all closer. If you'll have me, sweetheart, he whispered, finally home. 1 year later, the old farm was no longer a place of ghosts and decay, but a sanctuary of life. The stay away sign had long been painted over with a fresh coat of white, replaced by a simple wooden plaque near the gate that read, The Kong Family Home. Tae-kong stood on the newly reinforced porch, his dark suits replaced by a comfortable linen shirt, watching as Johnson and Jackson helped a local gardener expand the irrigation system for the orchard they had planted together. The Mercedes still sat in the driveway, but it was often filled with school bags, sports equipment, and the restless energy of 3 children who finally knew where they belonged. Taekong had stepped back from the family business in the city, realizing that his empire of fear was nothing compared to the kingdom of peace he had built in this rural soil. He spent his mornings in the rose garden, his mother's garden, teaching Nia how to prune the stems so they would grow back stronger the following spring. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Johnson approached him with a small, leather-bound book. It was a ledger they had started together, tracking the growth of the farm and the success of the children's studies. "Grandpa," the boy said, using the title that still brought a lump to Taekong's throat, "the roses are blooming more this year than ever before. People in town are asking if they can buy some." Taekong smiled, looking at the vibrant blossoms that defied the winter they had once endured. "Tell them they aren't for sale," he replied softly. "Some things are too valuable to have a price." He realized then that his ruthless years had been spent chasing an inheritance that could be stolen or lost, but what he found in this abandoned house was an inheritance of the soul. He had finally learned that real wealth wasn't found in the power to pull things down, but in the patience to help them grow. As Nia ran toward him, her laughter echoing against the sturdy walls of the house, Park Taekong knew he was no longer a man of shadows. He was a man who had finally come home, protecting the only legacy that truly mattered.